Since 1976, Habitat for Humanity has combated substandard housing around the world. Their interfaith initiatives have drawn representatives from Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Today on Religion and Life, we have two guests who are involved with Habitat in the High Country. Alex Hooker, the Executive Director for the Watauga Habitat for Humanity, and Janice Copenhaver, Co-Chair of the Church Relations Committee for Habitat. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Habitat for Humanity is a recognizable trademark. People understand that Habitat's involved with building houses, but they may not understand some of the mission and the history behind the organization. Alex, could you help us with that a little bit? Describe the mission for Habitat for Humanity and when and where it was founded and what it stands for, perhaps?
Sure. The mission for Habitat International, as well as Watauga Habitat, is seeking to put God's love into action. Habitat brings people together to build houses, community, and hope. And so we've been doing that here for the last 25 years. We've built 25 houses locally for families in need. We just started a repair program last year where we saw a need locally for repairs that we didn't feel like people were getting adequately. So it's a fledgling program, but we just started that this past year. And through our education programs, our building programs, we do financial literacy training for people that come in, all different kinds of education classes, but to try to prepare them to be homeowners. But we've served over 100 families locally in those programs.
And this focus on housing, so the 100 families or so, you're really trying to provide suitable, good housing at affordable prices for families really that otherwise would not be able to afford such housing. That's kind of the kind of bottom line mission behind the organization, is it?
Right, yeah, I mean, we typically, to be a Habitat homeowner, what you have to have are three things. Need, so you have to have need. We go and establish, we do home visits to see if they actually need better housing, to see what the type housing they're living in at that current time. Willingness to partner, and that's whether they're willing to do the sweat equity. Each adult has to do 250 hours of sweat equity on the house that they're going to live in. So if you've got 3 people over 18, a mother, a husband, and a son that's 20, and they're going to live in the house, they all have to do 250 hours, which is substantial. I think on paper that might not seem like a whole lot, but when you actually have to go out and do that, that's some willingness to partner. Yeah, it's hard to do. So the willingness to partner, the need, and then they have to have the ability to pay. We don't give our houses away, we sell them. No interest loans. The houses are cheaper because of volunteer labor, in-kind gifts for materials, that type of stuff. So the houses end up being cheaper. We have a policy on how we price our houses and sell them to them. But anyway, they get houses cheaper, and then they usually get a 20 to 30-year mortgage on it, no interest, and that's the ability to pay portion of it.
I was talking to Janice earlier about this no interest loan idea, actually, and Janice, you said it's actually a biblical model, I believe, the idea that providing these loans.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the history of Habitat, where founded by Minister Clarence Jordan, and then Millard Fuller joined him, and I think they looked at the book of Exodus, and I think it's the 2nd chapter that says that you loan the poor money with no interest. And so that's the basis of the mortgages that the people that our families pay, and they're quite reasonable. The houses appraised, I think the last one's around $100,000, but their mortgages for around $100,000, but they appraised for $190 somewhere in there.
The last house appraised for $210,000.
Okay.
So they're basically paying $100,000 exactly, not like the rest of us who own houses who are paying additional interest. So it's very much a model supporting families who can't, especially in the high country, can't really afford the rent to have adequate housing. And I think the mortgages are around $400 to $500.
Yeah, they're right at $500 right now, and that includes their taxes and insurance and their property owners association.
Now, how do you pull this off? I would imagine it's next to impossible to find the traditional bank to provide a no interest loan. So do you finance these houses yourselves? Do you act as the bankers? How do you provide these mortgages for your clients?
In about 2 weeks, you'll get a call from me asking for money, and that'll help pay for that'll help pay for the next house. And so, yeah, we're our own bank, so we have to go out and fundraise. We have to fundraise in our own service area. So we can't, if we know somebody at Linville Ridge or if we go to Linville Ridge and start putting up stuff, we can't do that because Avery County has their own habitat.
Okay.
Or North Carolina has the second most affiliates in the country. I think we have around 81 affiliates. It's typically one per county. But we have to fundraise in our own areas, and we don't have a lot of businesses up here, but we have enough supporters to where we can build. Right now, we're building about 1 to 2 houses a year, and so we have to raise $100,000 to $200,000 to pay for those houses. And there's other costs involved, but that's typically what we're looking at raising per house. And we don't get a lot of government subsidies, so HUD does provide a little bit of help on that. And so hopefully those programs don't go away, or otherwise that's pretty much our only subsidization from the government.
So you're really dependent on not only fundraising but volunteer labor. I mean, it sounds like without an army of volunteers, you're dead in the water. It seems to me. And I was talking to you earlier, and I believe both of you now hold positions, of course, with Habitat, but you both started as volunteers, labor on the ground, so to speak, and I guess love the organization so much that you turned it into more than volunteer work. Janice, what happens if a client can't pay, defaults on their mortgage? Does it work just like any other default?
It really does. I mean, our expectation is that each homeowner pays their mortgage so that they help fund another house, and they try to look very carefully. Their credit is checked and things when they are approved to get a house, and so we really need to make sure that they have the ability to pay first. But life happens, and sometimes medical bills will get families. There are families that usually don't make a lot of money anyway, so we work with them. We have a procedure that we created 2 or 3 years ago that gives them an opportunity to catch back up, but puts in place that they're expected to pay their mortgage, just like they're expected to pay anything else.
I want to get back to this volunteer aspect a little later, but I wanted to first pick up on, Janice, something you said. You mentioned the history of the organization. In particular, you mentioned a couple names, Millard Fuller and Clarence Jordan, or maybe Alex mentioned them.
Yeah,
but
we talked about them.
Both of you mentioned those people, very important personalities in the history of Habitat. Habitat for Humanity has a fascinating history. So if you could tell us a little bit about where this got started, how the idea gets started, what are the roots of this whole organization?
Do you want to start?
I'll start it. You just fill in. Okay, that sounds good. So the roots of it really go back to Clarence Jordan, who was a minister, theologian, and he got a degree in agriculture from Georgia. I won't go too into depth about that, but he started a farm in Georgia, and it was a kind of a commune where people came. They gave up all their worldly goods. They came, lived on the farm. They worked together. It was integrated. So that you had African Americans and whites working together, and in Georgia in the 1940s, that was somewhat frowned upon. So it's a very interesting story. The KKK came in and drove 70 cars in there to protest, and it was they never retaliated or rose up against it. They basically just took it kind of with they just responded by writing editorials to the paper, and that was how they dealt with it. But they were bombed. Their fruit stands and vegetable stands were bombed. So it was a tumultuous history with koinonia, and that was Koinonia Farms. And
koinonia is actually a New Testament word, right? A Greek word that describes the early church community, right? Yeah.
So koinonia, just kind of a fascinating place historically. But in the 60s, Millard and Linda Fuller, who were very successful, had given up a lot of their goods, their worldly possessions. He was a millionaire, he had very successful businessman, and they had some marital issues anyway. They ended up at Koinonia, gave up everything, and worked with Clarence Jordan to start what was partnership housing. That's kind of what they added to the mix that wasn't there at that point. And that was the basis for Habitat for Humanity. Miller and Linda wanted to take it more internationally, where Clarence wanted to keep it in South Georgia. And so they left Koinonia in '73 and went out and started their own thing, did some stuff in Africa, and came back in '76, and that's the kind of the birth of Habitat for Humanity International.
It's really interesting because when I think of Southern evangelical religion, I mean, the idea of a commune, a communistic group really, in some ways, established on a New Testament model, integrated fully in the racially charged South. I mean, that doesn't fit the paradigm that most people bring to mind when they think about Southern religion in the mid part of the 20th century. So it's that in itself, the history is fascinating and incredible. Now, so Millard Fuller got this organization started, and Habitat, I think, was well known already, but got a real boost from one of its most famous volunteers, Jimmy Carter. Can you tell me a little bit about how, and I think Jimmy Carter up until at least recently has, and maybe still is an active volunteer.
Yeah.
He's 90 years old, and he has, I think I read that he has a build for this year in Nepal.
He did Nepal last year.
Okay.
I'm not sure what this one is,
Okay.
but he's, and from the people that I talk to, a lot of people, when you say that you're with Habitat, Jimmy Carter comes up a lot. Either that he founded Habitat, which is not true, but a lot of people, he was our main advocate for a long time and our #1 volunteer. But I get a lot of people that ask about it, and people that have worked with him. He doesn't stay in separate quarters. He stays with everybody that's there. I mean, it's really, and that's to do it at 90 years old is pretty amazing. But it's just you hear so many good things about him and just his philanthropic nature. He and Linda. I don't want to say that she's not a part of that duo, but it's just pretty amazing stuff. But he got involved in 1984. And he's done the Jimmy Carter Work Project since, which is a 1-week build all over the place. It was in Dallas a couple years ago, Nepal last year. And he's just a huge advocate. And that put us on the map, so to speak. I mean, people did know about Habitat, but when he got involved, it really took off. The number of affiliates worldwide, and in the U.S., it just really skyrocketed at that point.
So unlike many celebrities who perhaps lend their name to a cause, you've got President Carter at 90 years old still driving nails and sawing 2x4s. That's a great story. Now, as you mentioned, Habitat is organized in local affiliates. So we have a local Watauga County Habitat for Humanity. Could you tell me a little bit about some of the initiatives you've got going on right here in Watauga County? Are you working on any houses right now? Anything else that's been part of the program lately?
Yeah, so each affiliate, they establish or they try to identify the needs in that particular area. So in Watauga County, we're still doing mostly single family homes. We used to do infill lots, so we would go around and try to get lots that were donated, but a lot of times they just, we couldn't get them to perk. They were, the taxes were too high on them. They were in a subdivision with a POA. So we, about 5 years ago, well, actually about 7 years ago now, we ended up buying 20 acres out by Green Valley School. So we're building 20 homes out there, and that's the Greenwood subdivision, and very nice homes.
Very energy efficient.
Energy efficient. We do a building program through the state where they come and they guarantee, they do a test on what their energy bills will be, and they guarantee that their heating and cooling will average $35 a month.
So these are homes that your clients will actually be able to afford to maintain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, Janice, you were telling me about a couple of initiatives actually that you've been involved with. There was a women's build or woman's build, is that correct? And then the other initiative.
Apostles Build.
Apostles Build. Could you say something about both of those perhaps, in particular the Apostles Build?
Sure. The Apostles Bill was a grant that Watauga Habitat got through Habitat International, and it was to contact 12 to 20 churches to fund and build a house. And so we did that in 2005, and completely just with grants and with the help of the churches, and it re-energized our kind of connection with the churches.
So would each church then be responsible for a particular house? Is that?
No, just to come work, and some churches said we don't have any money budgeted, but yet what they would do is do a spaghetti supper or a yard sale. I had almost every church said, no, we don't have that money in their budget, and yet somebody will say, come on, we can do something, and do something as simple as a yard sale that raised $1,000. So we were with the grants and then with those church efforts, and particularly what was really special was to get churches smaller churches who said, I don't think we can get 10 people out or 15 people out to work on a Saturday. And I said, well, would you partner with another church? And they said, sure. And so in every case, we had more volunteers than we needed when we did that. It made it exciting. It got churches together, and so that was a lot of fun. And that's kind of why we've gone back to church doing. I'm chair of the church relations committee, so we're trying to reestablish connections and get people. Now that we have land and places to build, we're really trying to get churches to come out on a more regular basis and help us build. And then the second one I just lost track of.
Women
The
Build.
Women's Build, yeah.
That's an annual event we do, and it's usually in the first week of May, and try to get women to come work on 2 Saturdays.
Your job as Church Relations Committee Chair or Co-Chair, I would imagine I'm sure there's some challenges there, not only small churches who may not feel they have the resources, but even large churches have their own mission projects that they're invested in. So I'm sure it's a challenge to coordinate and to convince these organizations that this is a worthwhile, and not that it's not worthwhile, but it's something that they can give some resources and time to.
And there are a lot of needs in the community, and there are a lot of needs in every church. But the kind of exciting thing, I think with churches, what we do is ask for them to pray for the mission of Habitat, to volunteer, to help us find families, and then if they can do a fundraiser or support us financially, that's helpful too. But there are lots of ways you can be involved with Habitat, which don't involve money. It's your time.
Right. At the introduction of this show, I mentioned that Habitat's primarily and historically a Christian organization, but there have been initiatives in some places that have brought together people of different faiths purposefully on a build site. They go by various names. The House of Abraham initiative, for example, brings together the 3 faiths who trace their heritage to Abraham: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And this seems to be a kind of new initiative as a way of getting interfaith cooperation to work on these projects. And I know that Watauga County doesn't have such an initiative yet, but I think you've been looking into it or reading about it, doing some research. Could you mention just briefly whether that's been successful? Is it growing? Is that a possibility perhaps for the future in Watauga County? We don't have a real diverse religious groups here, but still, is that a possibility, something like that?
I think anything where we get more people involved working together from all different walks of life, I think creates dialogue. It gets us working with each other, and that's part of kind of what Habitat, in terms of partnerships. I mean, everything's built around partnerships, just working together to just help our common man. It's the belief that every man, woman, and child needs a decent, affordable place to live with dignity and in safety. So, but I like that model because it does get more people together, and you do get some dialogue going. We haven't discussed doing that here, but I've seen some of the stuff that they've done, and it seems very interesting. One in Ohio was called the Holy Toledo Build, which I love that. I love that name, but it just seems to sometimes they say where if people work out some differences there, which
Right.
seems a little scary to me, but in most cases, it's like it creates dialogue between people and they understand people a little bit more. I know that the food issues for some have been interesting,
dietary
just in
issues.
terms of if somebody serves a lunch, they
That's
can
important.
easily offend one group of people by chicken broth or,
I see.
just using
Right.
certain things. So you have to be a little bit careful with that too. But
Well, it seems like in our world we hear so much about tensions between these three faiths in particular that these efforts to bring them together, doing something positive, are really encouraging. So, Janice, let me put a question to you. Suppose I want to volunteer, or someone I know wants to volunteer for Habitat, but I come to you and I say, well, I have absolutely no building skills. I can't swing a hammer. I don't know which end of a saw to hold. Do you have a place for me?
We have a job for you.
Okay, so what's it like on a job site? What would you put me to work doing, and would I eventually be trained to do some substantial heavy lifting?
I think it varies in what you're comfortable doing. We have a really, really good construction supervisor who's loves working with volunteers and is good. And if you want to learn how to do things, there are plenty of things that need to be carried, swept, painted. I'll tell you, my sons started working. They're now 20 and 22. They started out helping to build the foundation. They did not get that from us, trust me. But they just, Jim said, do this. This is how you do it. We'll make sure it's level. And so they didn't let them build it crooked. But he taught them very patiently. So mostly you have to have a willingness to learn. And if you're afraid of power tools, you don't have to use them. There are lots of things, and every ability at job, there's something for someone to do.
And I would imagine that that you recruit or have volunteers, professional people who do this for a living. They're on the job site, overseeing and supervising and actively doing the labor as well. Is that,
Yeah. Jim Rogers is our construction supervisor, and he's a licensed contractor, runs his own business, works for us Wednesdays and Saturdays. And then if he's not there, we have a supervisor. So you're not just like, here, go do this. He's just especially friendly and patient at helping people jump in and learn. And I think you kind of get a bug once you've worked on a house that this is really important work and how valuable it is to help this family. Very often, one of them is there working on the site with you, doing something. You learn a little bit about them, their kids, and that kind of thing. So it's really enjoyable, and you don't have to have any skills.
So describe the payoff. The house is completed. The family's ready to move in. Do you have a ceremony, or what do you do to introduce them to their new home?
I mean, the dedications are the payoff. So we have a
They're
dedication
amazing.
where we have the volunteer sponsors that have sponsored the house. If we had sponsors, just a kind of the Habitat family, we send out something to all the previous homeowners, and usually it's a pretty intimate group, 30 to 40 people with the homeowners, and we go through a service that they choose. They're typical Habitat services, but they can cater or change them any way they want to. And then we present them with the Bible and give them the keys, and the family usually says something. But those are the moments where it kind of ties everything together, and everybody's there to see it, and they can get real emotional. And seeing the children go through that, and when the children see the rooms for the first time, where sometimes they've been shuffled around from house to house, and they get this, when they finally see their own room, and they get this sense of permanence and knowing that everything might be a little more stable for them. I think that's one of the big payoffs there, and it all kind of comes together there at the dedication.
Wow. Yeah.
And I'd just like to add, in a different affiliate I volunteered, I surveyed homeowners at their 10-year anniversary and asked how did Habitat change their lives? And they said, my children are not afraid. They feel safe. Their grades are better. We feel more confident, and we feel like we're worth this house. So just that kind of thing just makes you very proud to be part of an organization that does that.
It's incredibly rewarding, must be.
Yep.
So Just give me an idea from start to finish. How long does a build take? You identify the family, and from that moment to the dedication, that culmination, typically, what would be the build time?
About,
getting a family into this the housing.
I'd say at our current 2 days a week with weather up here, we're looking at 9 months.
That's great. I mean, that really gives a time frame for a family who might be in a hopeless situation to look forward with hope, and then to end up with that sense of safety and stability, Janice, that you mentioned. It's incredible work you do, and I think the future for Habitat in Watauga is bright, and I'll be expecting your letter in the mail within the next few weeks.
I'll call you.
But thank you both for coming in and informing us about your organization.
Sure.
You're so welcome. That
is it for Religion and Life. If you have any questions or comments, you can go to www.watchapptv, that's watchapptv.com. Join us again next week for Religion and Life.